Good evening, everyone. Very warm welcome to Cass Business School and to this Dean's Lecture. I'm Stephen Haberman, Dean of Cass, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here, and in particular our speaker for this evening, Hendrik du Toit, CEO of Investec Asset Management. And Hendrik is going to be speaking to us this evening, and particularly giving us some critical insights from the perspective of an institutional investor into the state of capitalism 5 years on from the start of the financial crisis. Since I have a captive audience, I'm going to just take up a few minutes to talk about Cass, if you don't mind. As far as asset management is concerned, Cass is very well known for its Centre for Asset Management Research, where we bring together academic theory to look at some of the real problems facing the asset management industry. And this is in keeping with the Cass ethos of bringing to bear rigour on the sort of problems that practitioners and policymakers are facing in the real world. And this research we feed back into our degrees at MBA level, postgraduate master's level, and undergraduate level. As many of you will know, we are a highly ranked business school, and I should preface my comments by saying the business school world is one of league tables, and league tables were designed to determine which is the best football team, not which is the best business school or university. But nevertheless, it's the world in which we live, and Cass finds itself in the top 4 in the UK, according to many measures, independent measures of business schools. And one that we're particularly proud of is the Guardian League table, which places our undergraduate programmes as number 2 in the UK. I'm particularly proud of it because number 2 is better than number 4. I'm an actuary and I can work this out. And one of the really exciting things we're doing at the moment is developing and enhancing our various facilities. So this is our postgraduate home, and we're in the process of completely refurbishing the MBA facilities here. But we're moving our executive-facing, corporate-facing activities, that's the executive MBA and executive education, into a new building near the Museum of London, which is a very exciting development for us. And at the same time, we're developing further our undergraduate home, which is about a mile away. So these are very exciting times as far as Cass is concerned, and particularly exciting to have a distinguished speaker this evening, Hendrik. So let me tell you a few things about Hendrik. He joined the Investec Group in 1991 as a portfolio manager, and he was a founding member of Investec Asset Management. And under his stewardship, Investec has grown from being, I suppose, what one could call a small South African startup into an international specialist asset management firm. Hendrik has several degrees, BCom degrees from Stellenbosch, MCom degree from Stellenbosch, and an MPhil from Cambridge. He's received many plaudits from his peers in the industry. I can't go through them all, there are too many, but let me just mention one or two. In 2008, he was named Asset Management CEO of the Year by Global Investor. He's on the board of the IMA, his Investment Management Association. In 2011, he was named one of Financial News' top 10 most influential individuals in the industry. And 2012, he was named Chief Executive of the Year also by Financial News. So we're absolutely delighted to have Hendrik here to speak to us. Before he does, I have to make the usual housekeeping announcements. Could you please turn off your mobile phones? If you can get reception in this room, it's a miracle. So I certainly can't get reception in this room. And the second is that we're not planning any fire drills this evening. So if you do hear an alarm, we have to exit the room as quickly as possible. Please don't use the lift. Go up the stairs, and there'll be staff to guide you out of the building. Enough of me. I hand the floor over to Hendrik. Please welcome him.
Professor Hammond, ladies and gentlemen. I've reached the age where I occasionally rely on glasses. If I drop them or lose them, it's because I'm not quite used to them or want to admit that I wear them. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you tonight on a rather weighty topic. I don't know why I chose it. They told me choose a topic you really care about. And I thought talking to the students of CAS, who many of them have financial interest and will hopefully join the city, hopefully at investment management, but maybe banking as well, if there are still banking jobs left in the city at that point. And I think in our industry we so often do not think about the big issues. We think about the micro, we think about that particular model, we think about that specific product we're developing, and maybe that's got us where we are today. So I went completely overboard to the really big issue, the future of capitalism, and forget the institutional investor. Actually, what I should have said is 5 years after the Western financial crisis, and note Western financial crisis, a challenge for tomorrow's leaders. Many of them are in the room, many of them are in CAS Business School, and I'm speaking to you, because I think our generation we might survive, we might save it, but we have, or many of us have blown it by not keeping our eye on the ball or seeing the wood for the trees. So, the City of London has a unique position today. It is the most dynamic financial centre on earth. It is, as an institute or as a place, it embodies modern capitalism, not just financial capitalism, modern capitalism, i.e. truly global capitalism, linking goods, money, people, ideas. I think if you listen carefully and you take up my challenge tonight, the City of London might retain and grow that position. So let's get into the meat. What do? Why am I thinking about this? Well, I'm the founder and the CEO of a money management business with $100 billion of other people's money. Not our money. Other people's money. Those people are going to live off the returns that hopefully the capitalist system provides. Because I haven't seen very high financial returns in the alternative that I grew up with, i.e. the communist system. And it concerns me that we attack our system, that we question it, without interrogating, without looking at the principles, without relating what happened, in particular in the financial sector, but also now the bankruptcy of Western governments which followed that. Have we thought carefully about it? Do we understand what is the system, and do we understand what was either industry, human, or policy error? And I'd like you to think about that when you go away, because I can't give you that answer in a simple lecture of 20 minutes, but I'm going to make you think about it. Also, I was born in Africa, and we have a big business in Africa, and I'm very excited about the prospects of the developing world, and particularly Africa today. But those prospects are dependent on a successful economic system, global economic system, and global financial system. No one can grow in isolation except North Korea, and they don't grow. And today the world is connected in a way which will not allow countries the opportunity to grow in splendid isolation unless they're very large. Majority of the developing countries cannot do that. And that's why I'm really concerned about the future of capitalism. But when I was a student here in the UK in the 80s, something struck me. Many of you come from, how many of the students here come from other countries? You put up your hands. That is an embodiment of what London is and of what capitalism has become. It's talent migrating to opportunity. Now, when I came here as a student, you can laugh because the job opportunities in London are rather limited right now, but I hope they will grow again. But when I was a student in the 80s, the thing that struck me, coming from a rather isolated economy at that point in time, was something that never struck me when I was studying even economics within that economy, which is South Africa, is the asymmetry that existed in the 80s. Developed countries had essentially a monopoly on international trade, their companies were multinational companies. Actually, they were British companies. They were American companies. They were extracting resources in the developing world. They were trading with the developing world on not such a fair basis, because all the power was theirs. What has changed since the time I was a student in the 80s and the financial crisis, and the financial crisis will be remembered in 1,000 years from now, is the moment when the world moved back into balance. When Western capitalism and Western countries weren't entirely, or stopped being entirely dominated, and we go back to a multipolar world, that increases the opportunity set for the capitalist system immensely. And I'll get back to that, and you'll understand why I'm actually excited about the opportunities afforded in the world. But the system has to work, otherwise finance wouldn't flow and fund opportunity. So now, more than 5 years after the beginning of the financial crisis, the developed world is struggling again to regain its pre-crisis momentum. In fact, output isn't there yet, particularly in this country. And in addition to the clear power shift from west to east, we've also had a power shift from physical to digital world. And those two power shifts are extremely important and will result probably into a different kind and a more interesting kind of capitalism. But it's threatened by a very dangerous cocktail of aging populations, slowing economy in the West, huge debts, and of course, a democratic entitlement. We talk about equality, we talk about democracy, but actually, in the West, we've institutionalized entitlement. A large part of the $100 billion we invest around the world for investors from across the world, from Asia, from Europe, from the US, from Africa, from Latin America, we invest in the emerging markets. The one thing I always see when I go there or experience is the lack of entitlement. People get on with it. They don't have pensions. They have pensions maybe, but it's early stage. It's not all, guaranteed and DB'd, and they used to start it in DC. They never had the DB promise, and they get on. And you know what they do when they really struggle? They open or they buy a piece of land, and they grow vegetables, and they have a cow or two, and they survive. And they don't ask the state to look after them. Today, what we have done in Western democracies, we have mortgaged, not ourselves, but our children. And yes, some of us blame it on the banking sector, and some part of it was unlocked by the banking crisis, when the visibility of these debts became apparent, or when these debts became visible. But they were incurred and raised and created many years before because of our entitlement. And we've done the most undemocratic of things. We've actually given the unborn no choice in the burden they will have to bear. So there will be other solutions which may not be that in sync or in sync with a natural capitalist solution of growing prosperity, and that might be defaults, etc. But at an institution like CAS, you want to create leaders for tomorrow. And I think that's why tonight we want to encourage these leaders, not just to think micro, not just to prepare yourself to get a higher paycheck, because that is in doubt if the regulators have anything to do with it, and if the spirit or the public has anything to do with it. In fact, you should think about how to recreate and reinvigorate the system, which will inevitably, or in the end, create prosperity for all. Today we face populist politics, that's the norm. Tax used to be a matter of rules and law, as far as I can remember. Now politicians opine on tax, and coffee companies decide how much tax they're going to pay. It's not a good example, or it's not a good precedent for future of capitalism. Disregard for contracts, just because of popular opinion, is currently seems to be par for the course and accepted. I think we need to smell the coffee before we start a mob rule in our modern capitalism. Tonight, I'd like to offer a defense of capitalism. But I also like to talk about the obligations that people who benefit from it should shoulder. We have a great deal of expectations to meet. Billions of people in the developing world. And as we speak today, what's very interesting about the world, the debates are so different in different parts. 3/4 or 80% of the world are talking about growth challenges, about getting on, about making a better life. Maybe it's 70% or so. 1 billion people are really struggling, and then 1 billion people are complaining about the debts and the financial crisis and the downturn that they are experiencing currently. So there are 5 billion people on the march in the world with a very positive agenda, striving. And in fact, a recent Pew a survey done shown that in China, 74% of the people are happy with what they perceive to be the market system. In Brazil, 75%. In the US, 67%. Then if we move closer to home, those numbers drop quite considerably. But I will argue for capitalism. And I will argue that capitalism has a very strong future. Because if I look at the evidence, and you at Cass Business School do look at the evidence, knowing that you're run by an actuary, you look very carefully at the evidence. If you look at the explosion in world development and advancement that happened since the 16th century, it had something to do with that phenomenon of capitalism. Humanity has achieved, by all standards, much more prosperity and advancement since the 16th century than in all the 250 million previous years of its existence. That's quite a strong evidence. Now, Marx, the ultimate enemy of capitalism, in my days when I was a student in the UK, they all read Marx. I think Marx got forgotten, but it's being dusted off, especially in Oxbridge. I can tell you that because it was very latent there. But Marx said, he coined the term capitalism, and he really thought capitalism would just destroy itself because of its internal contradictions. Now, those contradictions are referred to by the supporters of capitalism as the perpetual motion and the drive and the energy of capitalism. But when I was here in the 80s, people who were capitalists, and hard capitalists, were supporters of people like Alan Greenspan. Ayn Rand was the poster girl. And I quote how she described capitalism: a social system based on the recognition of individual rights, including property rights, in which all property is privately owned. In a capitalist society, all human relations are voluntary. Men are free to cooperate or not, to deal with one another or not, as their own individual judgments, convictions, and interests dictate. Well, that's very free. Personally, I'm a little more comfortable with Max Weber. And in his Protestant Ethic and Spirit of Capitalism, he talks about capitalistic economic action is one which rests on the expectation of profit by the utilization of the opportunities for exchange. He then goes on to say it should be peaceful, and then he goes further. He says unlimited greed or gain is not in the least identical with capitalism, and is still less its spirit. And the spirit is important. I think we've forgotten a bit about the spirit here between 2003 and 2008, and some people still haven't remembered about the spirit. But capitalism remains identical with the pursuit of profit and the forever renewed profit, i.e. the annuity that we create when we create value. And it's important to know, we're not arguing about profit. Profit is the driver that advances people. It's the context within which you make profit which matters. And when we go to the US election campaign now, they try to start this debate. But unfortunately, like most US election debates, in public at least, that they stay at the shallow level and at the level of rhetoric. So I'd rather go back to Marx. Marx saw the constant transformation and alteration of the system while people make profit as its Achilles heel. And in fact, Joyce Appleby, who's a capitalist, put it better. She talked about a relentless revolution. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to assure you that the relentless revolution will again, and is again on the go, and the majority of the people are busy with that relentless revolution. The question is, what kind of capitalist system are we going to get? What kind of, how much space will society allow the capitalist system in order to generate the fruits that we all require? And that's up for debate. And Anatoly Kaletsky, in his latest book, which I can recommend, Capitalism 4.0, really summarized the history, and then he asked some questions about the 4.0. But he describes the 1.0, and he just looked at the last century as the true free period. The early 2000s reminded one of the 20s. I don't think, and thank heavens there's no war, hopefully no war coming, but the sort of freedom, the complete freedom we had, and the excess. And that was the case before World War I, when business and politicians were completely apart and didn't really engage much. When the Bank of England, I think, was still private at that point. That was a different world. Then after the war and the Depression, Roosevelt and Keynes changed capitalism completely. It became a social project. And in fact, it was the state which manipulated or managed the economic cycle. There was a safety net, and a lot worse things of bankers were said then than politicians have said in recent years, if you go and read the history of the 1930s and 40s. Then Capitalism 3.0 emerged, really led by Milton Friedman and the Chicago School. And they put the market back in front, and the ultimate triumph was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now we're in a fourth phase, which Kaletsky expects to be pragmatic, full of experiments and common sense. And that's the role for people like you, the leaders of tomorrow. You have to apply your common sense, you have to apply your pragmatism, and you have to hear what society is saying without losing the essence of capitalism. And the essence of capitalism is the freedom to pursue success, innovate, driven by individual motivation and endeavor, often rewarded by profit, and sustaining the mechanism which matches money with opportunity. And that mechanism which matches money with opportunity is that down here in the city. And that's the one for which you educate people. And that mechanism has to work. So I'm not going to talk about the essence much more, but to say suffice to say that it depends on certain institutions. And I think respect for our institutions is a very, very important point. And part of that respect for institutions, and you're in a country, those of you who come from foreign countries like me, took a long time to understand one of the most important institutions in this country is its constitution, which isn't written down. When they had a little problem with a prime minister resigning and no government and no majority, the head of the civil service had to interpret this institution for a day or so. He did a good job and he got a government going. But those institutions are very, very powerful. And in our desires to modernize and change the system and that, we must not touch those because they underpin what capitalism, the power of capitalism. But there are a number of forces and which are going to impact, which we actually can't affect. They're already there, which will impact the outcome, i.e. the kind of capitalism we will have in 5 or 10 years from now. That is the concern around the environment and the sustainability of a life on Earth. Only a Luddite would say that climate change and environmental degradation will have no impact or does have no impact on us on Earth. You don't need to argue about 1 centigrade of global warming. That's nonsense. Just go and look at the mess outside cities. Go and look at the sea. Go and look at the piles of plastic. Go and look at the impact on the fish and on all our resources, and you'll know what we're talking about. That is going to impact on capitalism. And if people in the capitalist machine don't take heed, they will be forced on certain terms. And I think we all see it, we know it, we can see boards do it. But as institutional investors, there's no point of having a nice little sort of ESG program on the side. It's key to ask your companies how they behave, and right through capitalism, that will be a key force. Inequality, the tolerance or the intolerance for certain levels of inequality and poverty will become another force which we cannot control, which we have to just cope with. And I'm not only talking about the billion people who live on this earth for less than $1 a day, although it's a complete shame that they are not integrated in some way or not. It's also relative. But on the relative side, some of us might want to have an argument that that's also a good thing. We're not going for complete inequality. But that debate is front and center of the world right now. And if you follow the recent Davos discussions, you would have noted that it's very, very, it's uppermost in the mind of people. Then the emergence of a multipolar world. We quickly moved to a unipolar world between the two Bushes, and the younger Bush sort of ended that with fiscal squandering and wars, etc. But today we are in a multipolar world. We are going back to 200 years ago when the world, since Christ was born, for, all the centuries, in fact, except two, China and India were respectively the largest economies in the world. So we're just moving back to a very normal state, and we need to learn how to trade with them, how to live with them, as people have done in this country and in this society for many years before. That, of course, leads to a kind of capitalism which is slightly different. I think Sir Martin Sorrell talks about a capitalism with Asian and other cultural characteristics, but it's not necessarily Asian. It's just the interpretations of state-led and free, or there's a convergence between state-led and free market-led capitalism, but there's also a new sensitivity for culture which is required and for way we do things. And we're definitely not going to dictate from London and Washington on how people should behave as capitalists. That time is over. But I'm encouraged about the future of capitalism, because when Jabal, at his famous 2009 lecture at Cambridge, when he drove one snowy day, I think he was the only man on the road because his daughter was in Cambridge, and he really wanted to deliver this lecture in which some German guy threw him with a shoe, but he delivered the lecture anyway, and it was a very good one, publicized it heavily. And he said, in the 21st century, economic globalization and the information network have linked us all together. Different cultures live together, influence each other. No culture can flourish in isolation. How much a country or a nation contributes to the culture of humanity is increasingly determined by her ability to absorb foreign ideas and renew herself. That is why China will remain open and receptive, value her own traditions, while drawing on others' successful experience, and achieve economic prosperity and social progress in a civilized and harmonious way. The future of capitalism is underwritten by the Communist Party. So I think capitalism will be there. Fourth force which we need to reckon with is varied growth prospects will require a review of existing social contracts. So we have to rethink our social contract. It's going to change. The debts, the inability to provide a certain kind of retirement and pension and life that we got used to, that's there. And in his book, Paper Promises, Philip Coggan expresses this very directly. I may say so for an Englishman. He says, I quote, "The massive debts accumulated over the last 40 years can't be paid in full, and they won't be paid. Whether it's inflation, whether it's some other way, we are going through a long restructuring period in a part of the world, not in the whole world." The fifth force that we will not be able to resist is social and interconnected capitalism. I'm not capable to speak of it. I'm not a Facebooker. I carry all sorts of devices, but the more new devices come out, the more I have to have. I still have a BlackBerry, I still have an old Nokia phone, and I have an iPhone, and I'm not on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. But I do know the power of this, and I can see it. And in a crowd capitalism, dealing with individuals as opposed to through corporate veils or through collectives in corporates is going to change the power of both governments and corporates, and we need to learn and understand that. So those forces are affecting capitalism, but they're not changing the essential premise of capitalism. And of course, the one that I really like to emphasize is the last one I'm going to mention, the sheer size of the opportunity. Just think of it. In 1991, when we started our business, and we had no money under management, global GDP was $23 trillion. 23. Just before the financial crisis, global GDP was $57 trillion. And today, $70 trillion. The cake is massive. If you're half good at anything, all of you guys, half good, you can reach all of those people you can sell to. You can communicate with them instantly. And if your product is the one they want, they're going to buy it. There's that wonderful ad about a young kid. I think it's an HSBC ad. A young kid who's sort of 11, 12 years old and talking about his business and saying, well, he's just connected with everyone and the orders are coming in and he's already thinking about the next thing he's going to sell the world. That is our opportunity. And that the 5 billion people on the march provide us, and they're not going to stop. And over the past 20 years, before we get too critical about capitalism has lifted approximately 500 million people out of poverty. 500 people. That was half the number of people. In fact, some of you in the room, and I won't say who, when you were born, in fact, it was a quarter of the human population at the stage you were born. You youngsters, there were more people in it. 500. China alone lifted 200 to 250 million people out of poverty through the policies of Deng Xiaoping. So, we're in a world filled with opportunity. How should we act? What is the challenge for us? The challenge for us who study at City Business School, Cass Business School, who possibly want to go in the financial sector, is that we play by different rules, or that we make new rules. Rules which are tolerable to the people around us, and rules which guide us, or principles which guide us to behave sensibly over the long term. And I want to, if you're bored, and I know some of you are very good at numbers, if you're going to be bored at Cass Business School, go and read not just The Wealth of Nations of Adam Smith. Go and read the book that Wen Jiabao quoted when he was at Cambridge talking to Westerners. What he didn't know is that there were a lot of Marxists in the room probably, but talking to Westerners, he referred to Adam Smith and The Wealth of Nations, and then he spoke about the theory of moral sentiments, which he clearly had read and understood. And then there Adam Smith said, and that was in 1759, long before Wealth of Nations, he said, if the fruits of a society's economic development cannot be shared by all, he didn't say equally shared, he said shared by all, it is morally unsound and risky, as it is bound to jeopardize social stability. He was right. But also very importantly, then Smith goes on, and he defines the conditions under which his famed invisible hand may work to benefit society. And the invisible hand is, of course, the market mechanism. So in his rather old-fashioned, and it is old-fashioned, but I quite like it language, he said people should be virtuous who engage in capitalism. And he defined a virtuous person as one which has prudence, justice, beneficence, that's a word I hadn't heard for. I think I hadn't heard it until I read it in Theory of Moral Sentiment. And self-command. So those four principles: prudence, which is to moderate your excess or your desire for excess; justice, which limits the harm we do others; beneficence, which make us essentially good people, i.e. improving the lives of people around us. That's what Bill Gates is trying to do. Bill Gates is talking about creative capitalism, doing good with making money. And then lastly, self-command, which moderates our passions. And those are sort of the words of the of the book. Moderates our passions and reins in our capacity for destructive action. That's really what we need to think about. And ladies and gentlemen, I conclude by saying, if we remember this and act and lead accordingly, because many of you will lead, then the future could be that of an inclusive and sustainable capitalist system revered by all those, winners and losers, because the rules of that system would be fair. Will you live up to the standards of Adam Smith, the intellectual fathers of modern capitalism? If you remember only one thing, when you go out in 10 years' time, when you do a job and when you lead a business and when you run a big trading desk in the city, don't comment on your traders and say they weren't moral. Live up to the standards that Adam Smith set here, because otherwise the capitalism that you're engaging in and which pays you won't work. So, allow me to conclude with a quote from Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, which I always like when I speak to young people. He said, few of us will ever have the chance to bend history. We're not going to be the Bill Gateses, not all of us. Some of us maybe. But each of us can work to change a small portion of events. And in total, of all those acts, will be written the history of a generation. Our generation made many mistakes and hopefully can improve. Your generation holds the future of the most powerful wealth-creating mechanism mankind has seen. Thank you very much.